you have probably a variety of different like journeys getting here. So maybe raise your hand if you had your your power out at any point during Hurricane Sandy. Okay, raise your hand if you know people who did. Raise your hand if your space got flooded at any point. Raise your hand if you know people whose stuff got flooded. Raise your hand if you had to help somebody whose stuff was ruined. Raise your hand if you lost stuff during this hurricane. Raise your hand if you missed work during this hurricane. Or school. A couple of principles that we use to guide the work that we do out of here. One is anti-oppression and one is mutual aid. Both of those principles have kind of internal and external implications. The hurricane is a little bit more complicated than it seems. It's not just a random like flood. The hurricane is more complicated, and then it's also more complicated outside of the hurricane. So this hurricane is an expression of erratic weather patterns, which is a product of climate change, which happens because of the way we use fossil fuels, for which enormous multinational fossil fuel corporations with a disproportionate say over the politics and economics of our society have a disproportionate say. I was out in Coney Island a couple days ago, and I can tell you just from being there, it was really obvious that a lot of the people who were coming in there to get blankets needed blankets just because they needed blankets. They needed them before the hurricane also because they're poor. And that is also a crisis that's happening outside of all this stuff, on top of which a hurricane just landed. So the floodwaters didn't create poverty, they just wiped away a lot of the crap that made it hard to see. It's a big deal, and on the other hand, it's not about you. Or it is about you in certain senses, in the sense that you are part of all these systems and you benefit from them, or you don't, or you reject the benefits that you have, whatever. I have all sorts of like gifts that are both genetic and conditioned, and have been given to me by my parents and the school I went to and whatever, and there are some of those things I could give back if I wanted to, and there are most of those things I can't give back, and so that's just a reality, and now we have to figure out what to do with that. If we're not aware of those different levels of privilege and the different like needs that people have and the different relationships of power that people have, then we run the risk of replicating or recreating a lot of the social patterns and hierarchies that are already at play that caused a lot of these crises to begin with. Like hurricane relief work as such might end in a week or 2 weeks or a month, and depends on who, because obviously like not everyone's lights go on at the same time and not everyone is as quick to get back into whatever they need to get back into. So, but those different like phases of the crisis might end, but then the rest of the crises are still there. And you should know also that there's a certain level of urgency to all this. There are like disaster capitalist developers who are trying to beat you to these sites because they've always wanted to flatten these projects and replace them with condos, and that is a real ass thing, which means that when you're out there, you not only have the opportunity to give people the blankets they need, but also to begin to lay the ground for people to actually turn their relief work into resistance work. There are a few kind of like practical reasons why it's us. I mean, there are, first of all, a lot of the relief and aid organizations have closed shop, which is indicative of something or other. Another reason is that this is, Occupy Sandy hubs are some of the only places that volunteers can come to plug in, because a lot of those relief agencies are actually not interested in using people and putting them in motion. They're interested in like delivering goods, and they've got an elderly friend of the family who's stuck. I'm from Hoboken, and he's stuck still without power on the 7th floor of this like applied, like a subsidized housing for elderly people building, and he's dealing with a lot more than just needing blankets. Like he's been trapped in that place for 12 days, and that shows. And so people's emotional needs. People's needs for actual human communication and stuff like that, that's a material need too. Who's been boxed up in a blacked out project high-rise in Coney Island for 12 days is probably not going to behave the way they would have behaved 12 days ago. And you need to be aware of that for a lot of different reasons. One, so that you don't recreate a lot of the patterns that people there are convinced that we are going to recreate. And you need to understand that there's like a whole lot of baggage that people have. Like, you're not the first people who are going to go knock on those doors. For the most part, the people who knock on those doors are like cops, or they're people who come with like a checkbox form and they just, blah, 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 like check off a number, check off a name, done, go home. Like, and that's not what we're doing out there. In a lot of cases, there is already community leadership there because people live there and because it's been 12 days of crisis, and in those moments, people step up to take care of each other. And again, like, I don't, in the same way as I don't know exactly where you're going, you are not going to know everything about the full picture of the kind of like network you're participating in. You don't necessarily have access to all the things that people need, and you don't have necessarily control over the timeline that people need it, so don't promise. That's just really kind of heartbreaking to go through a situation where somebody's promised you something that you really need and then doesn't deliver it. It also shatters trust and gets people not to open the door the next time. Now, when more people have their power and relief work doesn't look the same way, there are still battles to be fought. And then beyond all of that stuff, there are all the old battles to be fought, which is like immense budget cuts every year that you know, shut down schools, shut down hospitals, etc., to provide tax breaks for already millionaires and then provide them the opportunity to privatize all the public services that are being cut. This is a battle and a crisis that always exists, which will be just exacerbated and intensified by this hurricane, which means that one of the things that you're doing is not only providing relief in the immediate sense of a blanket or a conversation, it is also laying the ground for this relief work becoming resistance work, because those communities are going to have to fight back.